Welcome to Silent Screams, where darkness whispers its secrets and shadows hold the stories you dare not hear. Tonight, we unravel 6 tales of terror, each born from the seemingly innocent act of trick-or-treating. But as you'll soon discover, even the safest streets can become corridors of fear when night falls. The first story begins with a quiet neighborhood and a child's haunting encounter with the unknown. It was a crisp Halloween evening, the kind where the chill of autumn air carries an electric excitement. Jason, a 10-year-old boy dressed as a pirate, eagerly rushed from house to house, his candy bag filling quickly. His neighborhood was alive with the glow of carved pumpkins and the laughter of children. Parents stood at the ends of driveways, chatting and sipping on steaming cups of coffee as they kept watch. Jason was on his way to the last house on the street, a house that everyone in the neighborhood called the Hollow. It wasn't abandoned, though it looked the part. The lawn was overgrown, the windows were always covered with dark curtains, and the single porch light flickered faintly like a dying firefly. Rumors floated among the kids that an old woman lived there, a recluse who never spoke to anyone. Some said she was a witch, others believed the house was cursed. Jason, fearless in his youthful confidence, decided this year he would be the one to break the mystery. As he approached, the street grew unnervingly quiet. The laughter and chatter seemed to dissolve into the stillness of the night. Jason climbed the creaking wooden steps, his heartbeat quickening. He knocked on the door, 3 loud raps that echoed unnaturally, as though the sound was swallowed by the house itself. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the porch light flickered violently before going out altogether, plunging him into darkness. Jason stepped back, a shiver running down his spine, but just as he turned to leave, the door creaked open. There was no one there, just a sliver of pitch-black void. The faint smell of damp earth and rotting wood wafted out, making Jason's stomach churn. Summoning his courage, he called out, "Trick or treat." His voice trembled slightly, and the sound seemed to vanish into the void. A cold hand, impossibly cold, touched his shoulder. Jason spun around, but no one was there. The door slammed shut behind him, startling him so badly he dropped his candy bag. He bolted down the stairs, running as fast as his legs could carry him. He didn't stop until he reached the safety of his mother's side. Breathlessly, he tried to explain what happened, but when he turned to point at the hollow, the house was dark and lifeless, as though it had been empty for years. His mother dismissed it as overactive imagination, but Jason knew what he felt. And he swore he could still feel the icy grip on his shoulder. The second story takes us to another quiet street, this time in a small rural town. Emily and her friends, dressed in matching skeleton costumes, were out on a dare. Their target, an old barn at the edge of town. It was said to be haunted by the ghost of a farmer who had hanged himself in the rafters years ago. The girls giggled nervously as they approached, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The barn was decrepit, its wooden walls covered in moss and vines. The large door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. They stepped inside, their footsteps muffled by the layer of dirt and hay on the floor. The air was thick and suffocating, carrying the faint metallic scent of decay. They ventured deeper, their flashlights casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. Suddenly, a loud bang shattered the silence. Emily screamed, dropping her flashlight. The beam spun wildly, illuminating the rafters for a brief moment. There, swinging gently, was the unmistakable silhouette of a body. But when they shone their lights back, the figure was gone. The barn door slammed shut, trapping them inside. A low, guttural moan filled the air, growing louder and louder until it became an ear-splitting wail. The girls scrambled for the door, clawing at it desperately until it finally gave way. They ran all the way back to town, vowing never to speak of what they saw. But that night, Emily couldn't sleep. From her bedroom window, she swore she could see the barn in the distance, a faint light glowing in the rafters. The third tale follows a young couple, Mia and Eric, who decided to spend Halloween exploring an old, abandoned asylum on the outskirts of the city. It was supposed to be an adventure, a thrill to satisfy their love for all things horror. They brought along a camera, hoping to capture something supernatural. The asylum loomed before them, a hulking mass of crumbling stone and shattered windows. Vines twisted around its facade like skeletal hands. Inside, the air was damp and cold. Their footsteps echoed ominously in the vast, empty corridors. The walls were covered in graffiti, but beneath the layers of spray paint, faint outlines of old writing were visible. "Help me," one read, scratched deeply into the plaster. As they ventured further, they began to hear whispers. At first, it sounded like the wind, but then the voices grew distinct. They called out names neither Mia nor Eric recognized. The camera's battery, fully charged when they started, began to drain rapidly. The screen flickered, showing brief glimpses of things that weren't there, a pale face staring from the end of the hallway, shadowy figures moving just out of sight. Eric brushed it off as a glitch, but Mia was growing increasingly uneasy. In one of the rooms, they found an old wheelchair, its leather seat cracked and worn. As they turned to leave, the chair moved. Not just a slight creak, but a violent lurch that sent it crashing into the wall. The whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of voices echoing through the halls. They ran, tripping over debris, until they burst through the front doors and into the night. But as they reached their car, Mia froze. In the rearview mirror, she saw the wheelchair, now sitting in the middle of the asylum's front steps, as if watching them leave. And so, the night continues, with more tales waiting to unfold. As the couple drove away from the asylum, silence filled the car. Mia sat stiffly, her eyes darting to the rearview mirror as if expecting to see something, or someone, following them. Eric, trying to calm his nerves, chuckled uneasily. "That was intense," he muttered, gripping the steering wheel a little too tightly. "Probably just old pipes and wind messing with us." Mia didn't respond. Her hand was trembling slightly as she fumbled to check the footage on the camera. The battery, which had inexplicably drained inside the asylum, seemed to have revived itself. The screen flickered to life, but what she saw made her stomach churn. The video was shaky, the lens catching brief moments of their exploration, but there were frames, just a few seconds long, that showed something they hadn't seen while inside. In one, a pale figure stood at the end of a hallway, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. Another showed a dark, humanoid shadow hovering behind Eric as he inspected the scratched "Help Me" on the wall. In the last visible frame before the video cut out, the wheelchair was moving, not pushed by an unseen force but with someone sitting in it, a gaunt, featureless figure whose hands gripped the armrests tightly. Mia dropped the camera, her heart pounding. "Eric, look at this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Eric glanced over for a moment, his face losing all color as he processed the images. What the hell was that?" he stammered. Before Mia could answer, the car radio crackled to life, static hissing loudly before a faint voice began to speak. It was distorted, impossible to understand, but it sounded desperate, pleading. Eric slammed the radio off, but the voice didn't stop. It continued, growing louder and more frantic, until Mia screamed, "Stop the CAR." Eric swerved to the side of the road, his breathing ragged. The voice stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that pressed down on them like a weight. They sat in the darkness, the only sound the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. Then, without warning, the back seat door creaked open. Both of them turned simultaneously, their hearts in their throats, but the seat was empty. "Mia, let's just go," Eric said, his voice shaking. But as he reached for the gear shift, Mia grabbed his arm. "Wait. Look." Through the windshield, just beyond the car's headlights, stood a figure. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs elongated and its face obscured by shadows. It didn't move, but its presence was oppressive, suffocating. Eric fumbled to start the car, his hands trembling so badly that it took several tries before the engine roared to life. As they sped away, the figure didn't follow. But Mia swore she could still feel its eyes on them, boring into her soul. Far from the asylum, in another town altogether, a different story was unfolding. Max, a 16-year-old high school student, had reluctantly agreed to take his younger sister, Lily, trick-or-treating. Their parents were out of town, and he'd promised to look after her. Lily, dressed as a witch, skipped happily ahead, her candy bag swinging with each step. "Just a few more houses, okay?" Max called after her, checking his phone for the time. The neighborhood was nearly deserted, most of the porch lights already turned off. But Lily had heard about a house at the end of the cul-de-sac that gave out full-sized candy bars, and she was determined to get there. As they approached, Max felt an inexplicable unease. The house was large, its architecture old-fashioned and Gothic, standing apart from the modern homes around it. Every window was dark, and the air seemed colder here, as if the house itself rejected the warmth of the world. "Come on, Max. One more," Lily pleaded, already running up the steps. Before Max could protest, the door opened. No one stood in the doorway, but a faint golden light spilled out, illuminating the porch. Lily hesitated for a moment, then called out, "Trick or treat." Her voice sounded small, almost swallowed by the oppressive silence. "Let's go, Lily." "This is weird," Max said, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But Lily stepped inside. "Hello? Is anyone here?" "Lily, stop!" Max shouted, rushing to grab her, but as soon as he stepped onto the porch, the door slammed shut behind them. The golden light vanished, plunging them into darkness. Max's phone flashlight flickered to life, casting an eerie glow on the peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture inside. The house smelled of decay, like rotting wood and something fouler he couldn't identify. "Lily, stay close to me," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. They moved cautiously through the house, calling out for help, but their voices echoed back at them, distorted and unfamiliar. Then, from somewhere upstairs, came the sound of laughter. It was high-pitched, childlike, but there was something sinister about it, something that made Max's skin crawl. "Lily, we're leaving. Now." He grabbed her hand, but she resisted. "Wait," she whispered. "Do you hear that?" Max froze, listening. The laughter had stopped, replaced by a soft humming. It was a melody he didn't recognize, but it was hauntingly beautiful, drawing them deeper into the house despite his better judgment. They climbed the creaking staircase, each step echoing like a gunshot in the silence. At the top, they found a single door ajar, the faint melody emanating from within. Max hesitated, but Lily slipped past him, her curiosity overpowering her fear. He followed, his heart pounding. Inside the room was a single rocking chair, its back to them, slowly moving as though someone had just left it. The humming stopped abruptly. Max held his breath, the air around them growing colder. "Lily, we need to go," he said, reaching for her. But before he could, the chair spun around. It was empty. A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them, and the walls seemed to close. The room shrinking as shadows began to creep along the floor. And then, from the corner, a voice whispered, barely audible but unmistakable, "You shouldn't have come here." Max grabbed Lily, pulling her toward the door, but it wouldn't budge. The shadows grew darker, swirling like living things, and the whispering multiplied, coming from every direction. And then, they saw it, a figure emerging from the darkness, its face obscured, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though it were a marionette controlled by invisible strings. It reached out a skeletal hand, and Max felt an overwhelming wave of dread, his legs refusing to move as the thing approached. The air grew colder still, and the whispering turned into a deafening roar.